Welcome, listeners, to the 6th episode of the UBERED podcast. I'm your host, Evan Kale. For 4 years, I was a full-time Uber and Lyft driver in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I gave more than 8,000 rides, and I wrote 2 books on the subject. UBERED, My Life as a Rideshare Driver, and the sequel, UBERED 2, both available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. Before we go diving into this episode, though, I just want to kind of make a point of clarification. It's been pointed out to me that the first episode, the sound quality is so-so, but then the second one, it vastly improves, and then it just has gone up from there. Listeners, this is my first podcast, and much like getting into rideshare driving, I just jumped into this head first. So I'm figuring this out too as I'm going, but I think it's really coming along, and I can only say that stick with me, and the quality will continue to go up. Thank you very much for everybody who's stuck with me thus far, and there's great things to come. Okay, let's get into the episode itself here. So this episode is called Scary. Or maybe it's, I don't have an episode title picked out yet. Maybe it'll call it like I'm trying to scare you or some shit like that. This is all the rides where I saw some scary shit, either in my back seat, or I heard some stuff that was scary, or I actually witnessed something scary between the rides. And what I do with these episodes is I will go through each of my books, and I'll just highlight all the stories. I'll write out all the stories that kind of fit the bill of the theme I'm doing. I've got so many scary stories that there's no way I can fit this into one podcast. So this is going to be part 1 of 2, guaranteed to scare the pants off of you. And for this one, what I've decided to do, I'm not really doing these chronologically, but for this one, this is mainly, almost exclusively going to be stories just from UBERED 1. Most of the UBERED 2 stories we're going to leave out. Now, every Uber driver who's on the road claims to have crazy stories, either scary or funny or whatever. Not like me. And part of that is because, as I talked about in a previous episode, I'm just a shit magnet. It runs in my family. I'm naturally unlucky. Highly unlikely things constantly seem to befall me. Basically, just I have to take a lemons, turn it into lemonade mentality. Anyway, I assert that my stories, my rideshare stories, are crazier than anyone else's by a long shot. And part of that has to do with the fact that not just am I only unlucky, but I also drove almost exclusively late at night. In fact, I was almost keeping an exclusively nocturnal schedule when I was a full-time driver. Actually, who am I kidding? I still keep a nocturnal schedule. I go to bed most days at about 4 or 5 in the morning. It's just as a writer, it's when my brain works best. And I know a lot of writers can attest to this. I don't quite understand what it is about the late night hour and the body clock and the brain. They say that people's minds are most creative late at night. And I can attest that this is true, at least for me. Sometimes I would pick people up and it'd be 1, 2, maybe 3 in the morning. And they'd ask, how long are you going for? And I'd say, well, till I feel like it. Maybe I'll go till 4 or 5. And they couldn't believe it. And this was something I just came to, it was like my everyday routine. So I didn't even bat an eye at the thought of staying up until, like I said, I do now till 4 or 5 most mornings. Back then it was like 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning sometimes when I would go to bed. Part of the reason for this was my background obsession with staying up late and being up all night. I'll talk about that in a second. But the other part was, as a rideshare driver, there's no traffic late at night, especially, most cities this is true, but especially in a place like Minneapolis. Like, the roads are just deserted past 10 p.m. So once you get to, like, the really late hours, I could do whatever the hell I wanted in my car. And I often did in terms of driving like I'm in the movie The Fast and the Furious, let's just say. Or, maybe I want a break. I'll step out of my car, I'll light up a joint, and I'll smoke it right on the street because there's nobody out who's going to stop me. So that was one reason. Another one, as I mentioned in episode 1, within my first 2 weeks of driving, I had the story teachers party where I go into the house with the teachers and I'm telling them about my writing background of screenplays, and they suggest that I write a book. So right away that idea was planted in my head and I ran with it. So kind of thinking about, okay, how am I going to write the best book possible? One of those things to emphasize the stories was being out late at night, because that's when people are drunk. That's when you see weird shit. That's when you hear weird shit. And true enough, some of the stories that I recount do happen during the day, but the vast majority of my rideshare chronicles take place at night. And the scary stuff takes place almost exclusively late at night. So in terms of being able to harvest these stories that I was seeking, it turned out to be a pretty effective strategy. But we'll put the brakes on that. Let's talk about my childhood for a second. So I don't have any siblings. I grew up an only child. And my parents, they would see a report on like 2020 or one of those news shows, and then they would adjust their parenting skills accordingly to whatever Barbara Walters would suggest. So I remember like there was one where it was the evils of trampolines and how your child is going to be a quadriplegic if you own a trampoline. Well, after that, I wasn't allowed to jump on trampolines at anyone's house, and my parents would call ahead if my friend had a trampoline and tell them that I wasn't allowed to jump on it. So another one, the worst one was somewhere along the line they saw a story on sleeping and sleep deprivation and how it'll make your kid not a functioning adult if they're not getting more than 8 hours of sleep or 10 hours or some ridiculous thing that was suggested. So my parents were bedtime Nazis, and they would, okay, I realize that's an extreme example. Run with the analogy. They were so strict about putting you to bed at early hours that it just drove me nuts as a kid. Like, I remember being like second or third grade, the sun would still be up. It'd be like 9 o'clock, the sun would just be setting. The other kids would be playing in the yard across, and I'm expected to go to bed. And I would just be sitting there, wide awake, for hours. I would end up staying up late just because I was just so agitated that I had to go to bed early that it drove me crazy. I mentioned that my parents bought me a sports car when I turned 16, and I will never, ever, ever do that for my kids. That was the dumbest idea on my parents' part. But as far as the bedtime thing goes, if I have kids, I don't know how I'm going to handle that. But I'm certainly going to take a better approach than my parents did, because as I got older, I really started to resent the fact that I just was expected to go to sleep. It didn't work like that. So fast forward to going to college, and now I have free reign. I mean, my parents didn't carry this shit on when I was in high school. But until I was in about 8th or 9th grade, this was the way that my upbringing was in regards to going to bed. So when I got to college and I suddenly had free reign to do whatever the hell I wanted, I started staying up extraordinarily late every night, and it just became a habit. And to this day now, I'm like a vampire. Getting into the rides themselves, as I mentioned in episode 1, I basically recounted the entire first chapter of UBERED. And in that, one of my very first experiences with a passenger was a nightmare. This guy is a super duper creep. The trip is called The Creep. He's digging through my glove box. He finds my name. He's hitting on me aggressively. He's touching me. He's asking me the size of my dick. He won't get out of the car at the end until I show him my dick. Like, oh, this guy's a nightmare. And then 2 weeks later, he's back in my car. So not the highest quality of passengers for my first 2 weeks. I mean, I guess everyone else was fine, but he was really creepy, and it really, really bothered me. But little did I know, his name was Daniel. His real name was Daniel. Little did I know that Daniel was just the tip of the iceberg. So creep was awful, but then nothing really happens for a couple weeks, and December comes and goes. I'm getting acclimated to the life, being out, being this independent contractor, in my car, running my own business, being my own boss. And around maybe the second week of January 2015, something interesting happens. Something kind of scary. Welcome to trip 329, The Fighter. So it's bar close. I pull up. I'm in downtown Minneapolis, and I pull up at the intersection of 9th and Nicollet, which I would come to say is a problem block. It's less of one now than it was a few years ago because there used to be a lot of crime in this one area. But I've had a lot of really interesting and bizarre encounters on picking people up in this one block. So I'm waiting. There's no specific address entered in. The pin has been dropped in the middle of the street. This is something that people used to be able to do. It used to just drive me nuts because sometimes when people drop it in the middle of the street, they don't realize that they did that, and so they're standing on one side of the street or the other, and it might be really busy, and they have to somehow figure out how to cross the street to me, and then it becomes my fault for not knowing which side they were on when they didn't enter it in properly to begin with. It was also a pretty good indication that a passenger was intoxicated. They're trying to drop the pin, and just in their drunken foolishness, they put it in the middle, or they put it upwards of a block, sometimes 2, sometimes even 3 or 4 blocks off. One time, totally random. One time I got a call from a guy. He was in New York City, and he had somehow hailed me in Minnesota, but he was looking for me on a street in New York City. And in this instance, it was broad daylight, and the guy was not drunk, so maybe the guy who designed the Uber app was drunk. That would make actually a lot of sense. But I'm digressing. So in the story, The Fighter, I'm waiting on 9th and Nicollet, and it's bar closed, and it's not even a Friday. It's like a Wednesday or something. Well, I'm waiting. Person isn't coming. And then I see some movement to the corner of my right eye, and I look, and there's a limousine pulling up next to my car. And the back door opens up, and these two college guys get out. They're like, maybe 19, 20, 21, somewhere in there. Bigger guys. And they get into the back seat. Or I should say, there's two of them, and one of them gets right into the car. And the other one's taking his time. He's saying his goodbyes to the people in the limo. And so I start the trip because you have to slide a tab to start the billing process, and then you learn where the person is going. So they're going to Hamlin. It's a private school in St. Paul. It's like kind of like a rich kid's college. So I'm making conversation with the one, and he's a little drunk, but he seems fine. And the other one's still saying his goodbyes, and the passenger door, the back passenger door in my BMW is open, so I can hear him saying his goodbyes. Well, he says goodbye, and the limousine pulls off, and he's walking to my car, and he puts his hand on the door to pull it open just a little bit further so he can slide in. But just shy of getting into the back seat, he starts yelling at some people on the corner of 9th and Nicollet. Just some random people. And I thought he knew these people or something because he's walking up to them and he closes the door. And he walks right up to this group of like 3 or 4 people. And this guy just decks the one in the face, punches him right in the face, and drops him. Now, I've been in martial arts for a long time. I have never seen anyone go down like this. I mean, this guy just fell like a stone as soon as he got hit. And now I'm watching this guy, my passenger, fight off the other 3. And so he fights him off, and he comes running into the car, and he hops in the back, and he screams, "Go, go, go!" And meanwhile, the other one who's just sitting there watching this as dumbfounded as I am remarks somewhere along the way, "Oh, not again." So the people that he was fighting come running at my car because they don't know who the fuck I am. They think I'm in on this or something. And I realized, like, I got to get us out of there because they might pull me out of the car and start to attack me. So I step on the gas and just race away. And this dude who got in the fight is screaming, "Woo! Yeah, that'll get your fucking blood pumping." Like, this guy he's got to be high on cocaine or something because he's just wide-eyed, mania, shouting, like repeating himself, not really making much verbal coherence. Seems very typical of somebody who is on cocaine. Well, we drive maybe 3 or 4 blocks, just far enough to get us out of there. And at this point now, I just pull over and I go, "Get the fuck out." And the guy who attacked the other people is like looking at me, like, "Why?" And I go, "You just assaulted somebody. I don't know what the hell just happened, but I'm certainly not about to get roped into your bullshit. Get the fuck out of my car or I'm going to call the fucking cops." And so this guy unbuckles his seatbelt and he gets in my face and he goes, "Take us home, Uber driver." And I look at him, I go, "Sweetheart, I have your credit card information. Get the fuck out or I'm going to make your life a living hell." And when I said this, the color just flushed from his face. This impenetrable, fierce stare just crumbled and cracked like glass and was shattered. So within the span of like maybe 2 seconds, he and his friend were gone. They didn't even bother closing the doors. They just fled from the car. And I shut the apps off and I went home after that. Now, maybe I should have called the cops. I don't like dealing with the cops. I'm going to talk about my feelings regarding the police in a later episode. In fact, I think it will be Scary Part 2 because I do have a really scary encounter with a police officer. But I don't want to get into that right now because that's a 10-minute story with another 15 minutes of background information. Okay, I'm not going to talk for 25 minutes about it. But I don't want to get into that in this episode. So that was the first really scary thing that happened to me was the fighter. But it certainly wouldn't be the only thing. The next thing, it's more of a pattern I had started to recognize. And then one night, not only do I come to acknowledge that the pattern is not just my imagination, it is real, but it takes me to a terrifying scenario. So here's the pattern. I get a call. It's a man buying the ride, or it's a man's name. The call is from a hotel, and the end destination is either another hotel or a motel, or in tonight's case, or in this trip's case, a mansion about 40 miles north of the cities at like 1 o'clock in the morning. These calls, when they're coming through that I'm describing, they're always late at night, and the passenger in the car is never the man buying the ride. It's always a young girl. And so I had thought to myself, after noticing this kind of pattern was going on, maybe these are prostitutes. And I thought, no, I'm just being an asshole. Like, no, that's a rude assumption. But it kind of started to seem more and more true. So this one in particular, this trip is called, it's 688, and I called it Night Call. So I get a call. It's the Renaissance Hotel in downtown Minneapolis. It's like a very nice hotel. And this young girl comes out, and she's wearing like She's wearing like next to nothing, and she looks like she put on her makeup with a shotgun. She looks like a prostitute, is what I'm trying to get at here. So we're driving, and these girls, whenever I would do these kinds of trips, not only are they all young girls like this, but they all are wearing very little clothing, despite the fact that it is winter, and they all didn't do the greatest job with their makeup. I'm sorry, my mom was a makeup artist. I know how to do makeup. And these girls look like they put it on quick. So we're driving, and these girls also, they never, ever, ever talk to me. Like, they just sit and they look on their phones, or like they touch up their makeup, or they do something, but it's like, I'm just not even there. I don't get a hello, I don't get a goodbye, I don't get a thank you. It's quiet the entire drive. So we're driving, and we're driving, and we're driving, and I'm thinking, like, where the fuck are we going? This is kind of weird. We turn off the highway onto this, like, desolate, like, country road. Before I know it, I'm turning off of this road, and I'm driving down this long private driveway, and there are these just towering, like, pine trees that are just, like, covered in snow. And there's a big mansion on this property. And as I'm pulling up to the mansion, these fucking giant guard dogs come running down. They're barking on my car and, like, jumping up on my car. And I'm thinking, like, where the hell are we? It's like 1:30 in the morning. This is like something out of one of my screenplays. So the door to the house opens up, but there's no one standing in the door. The door just opens up, and there's a whistle from the house. The dogs go running back in the house, and the woman gets out, and this is the first time any of these girls I thought were prostitutes talked to me. She just says, "Thank you." It was like Michael Jackson or something, like barely audible, and she slips into the house. The door closes behind her. Again, I don't see any person step in the doorway. It's just like the door like opens by itself and closes by itself. And so this girl just disappears from view. And then I start to think to myself, maybe I'm in the crosshairs or something. Like, I'm paranoid because this is so freaking creepy. And then I start to think to myself, I wonder if this girl has ever been here before. Who the fuck lives here? What goes on here? This just seems like a really bad place. So I turn around and I start driving away, and this fear in my mind is just getting worse. So then I just step on it, and I booked it out of here because I'm really starting to think like, I'm just letting my imagination get the better of me at this point, but I'm really starting to feel like I am in crosshairs or something. So this was just utterly bizarre. Now, I would go on to drive many other women fitting this bill who I suspected were prostitutes. But, I mean, I don't know for certainty. I never asked any of them, nor would I. What a rude thing to ask. But with a high degree of certainty here, I'm thinking I was correct. All right, now we're going to bounce to another sex-related story that would come later in my first year of driving. As I don't want to do these in order. I think it's more interesting if I do them kind of back and forth. So the next trip I'd like to discuss that was quite scary was trip 3200, which I called Bill Cosby. So I pick up, I'm going to, what's the name of this strip club? The Cabaret. It's in downtown Minneapolis, a gentleman's club, whatever. It's a fucking strip club. And I'm waiting outside for my passenger who is using a username. Now, I would come to recognize that the only ethnic group or like sociological group that would use usernames on Uber and Lyft were African Americans. I don't know why, but it was just something that I noticed. So I'm waiting for a username, and sure enough, this like kind of stocky black guy comes out of the club, and behind him are three women, and he's walking with one, and this girl's like got her arm around him. And then the bouncers are, like, dragging, like, two more girls. And they're not dragging them, I guess. They're carrying them or, like, walking them. But, like, these girls are just fucked up. And it's not even that late. It's, like, maybe 8 o'clock or something. So they load the girls up in the back seat, all three of them. And when I get a good look at them, I mean, these girls, like, now I'm realizing these girls are really fucked up. So he gets in to the front seat. And his username is DJ Atlove with some numbers. Forget what he said. His real name was like Tony or something, or that's what he introduced himself as. So we're going to St. Paul, and he's telling me that one of these girls in the back seat is his girlfriend, and the other two are workers at the club who he has picked up, and now like a three-way is going to go down. So he's kind of, feeling me out. He's talking to me, asking me about my interests. We started talking about Japanese cartoons, and he knows a little bit about them. So we're talking about that, and I had given these girls each a bottle of water because, they look like they could really use it. And I'm watching the one who's sitting behind Tony, and she's leaning on the other one like, she doesn't look drunk. She looks like she's, like, about to overdose on heroin. There's literally fucking drool coming out of her mouth. Her eyes are rolled back in her head. She seems like she might actually have to go to the hospital. The other two are making out, but their motor skills are so destroyed from whatever it is they're on that, like, they barely even possess the cognition to even make out. It's just more like their mouths are open and their tongues are just like resting on each other, and they're just like moving their heads back and forth, but like they can't even move their tongue. It was just gross, and these girls are just clearly way overly intoxicated. So maybe about 10 minutes into our drive to St. Paul, the girl whose eyes are rolled back in her head, she starts like gagging, like she's about to puke, and I quickly pull over and was like, oh no, she is not about to puke. And so I hand her a bag, and I'm like looking at this guy like, what should we do? And this guy is pissed. He goes, hey, Uber driver, you better keep driving or else you're going to be getting a whole lot less than 5 stars. And like his demeanor has suddenly gone from very friendly, like I said, we're talking about Japanese cartoons, to this guy looks like he wants to murder me, and he's way up in my face. And he goes, man, I spent a whole bunch of money to get these 3 like this. Like, if you fuck up their buzz, man, you fuck up our night, you fuck up my 3-way, oh, man, there's going to be hell to pay. And so I'm thinking, like, okay, should I just pull him out and call the cops? I mean, this guy might do something to me. What should I do here? And the more I'm driving, I'm looking back at these girls like they are in no condition to be consenting for any kind of a sexual anything, let alone what this guy is trying to get off. And I'm starting to think to myself, this is some really shady shit. I mean, this is like a rape that might be going on here. I don't know what I should do, if I should call the cops, if I should just pull over right now and just refuse to drive them. This guy seems kind of unstable. He might have a gun. I don't know. So we pull up to their house, or I should say apartment, and he helps the first 2 out of the car. And I look back at the one he's left in the car, because these 2 girls that he's walking into the apartment are like, they can like barely walk. And so I said to the girl, I go, are you okay? And she kind of looks at me funny, and now she hasn't gotten any more sober. But my thought is, like, in her inebriated memory, she has only seen this guy being like ugly and like having a bad interaction with me, and she's just gonna treat me with hostility. So she doesn't really say anything to me. She just kind of scowls at me, like through eyes that are barely looking in the same direction. And then he comes back and he helps her out of the car. He goes, come on, baby, let's go. And I'm thinking to myself, should I call the cops? I should call the cops. Yeah, but it's also like, I don't quite know what I should do here. I'm inserting myself into this situation. I don't know the backstory. I'm putting together pieces on my own. This could blow up in my face on so many levels. I don't know. This is awful. And I mean, ultimately, I guess I think my decision was awful. I didn't call the cops. This was an Uber ride, and at the time, it was support@uber.com. There was no phone number to call. There was nothing I could do to report that, hey, this guy is doing something really not okay. He may be involved in human trafficking. Now Uber does have alerts, or like a driver can say, like, I suspect my passenger is a victim of human trafficking. I suspect my passengers are about to get raped by this crazy, shady dude. This wasn't a thing back then, so it would have been on me to call the cops and insert myself into this. And it wasn't a clear situation. I didn't have a clear-cut answer what I should do. And when I have told this to friends, I've gotten mixed responses from them. Some say I made the right decision. Probably would have been a mess to insert myself in it. It could have blown up in my face. Other people say I probably should have called the cops, but I can't fix the past. Not yet! But when I get my hands on Hitler, ho-ho. Anyway. Okay, shifting gears here. Now I want to talk about some of the scarier situations that happen with harassment and being harassed. So as I mentioned in episode 1, I am bisexual. It was not something that I cared to share with my passengers, but a lot of time it came up in conversation. People would ask, so you got a girlfriend? And it's like, okay, I can either lie, which I don't like doing, or I can be honest, which I also don't like doing, because it'll either, maybe somebody's political aspirations are not going to be receptive to what I'm telling them. Like, if I have 2 elderly tourists from Alabama in my backseat, I don't want to tell them about my cocklust adventures. That's just not a subject that needs to come up. If they ask me if I have a girlfriend, well, shucks, I sure do, and we're getting married soon. In fact, we put off the wedding for the revival because we've got to go tour in the name of Jesus. That was the kind of thing that I would have to say just to make it easier on me. And like, it kind of killed me to do that. But sometimes for certain people, it just didn't behoove me to share the truth, especially when not only are they not politically aligned with me, or like, maybe their religious beliefs cause them to have some kind of animosity toward me for that, but also because, like I mentioned, I'm also being rated on every single ride. And if I'm getting less than 4 stars out of 5, so basically anything except 5 out of 5, that is the passenger recommending to the company that I be fired. Which, and I again mentioned this earlier, if I was fired, that meant I'm out of a job, I have to pay for this car, I don't get unemployment, like it would turn my life upside down. So under no circumstance could I allow that to happen. I mean, I can just picture it. It goes something like this.
Well, we liked Evan, it's just He affirmed an affinity for homosexuality, and there's no place for that in Scripture. 2 out of 5. Cocksucker.
So, I mean, really, just the big thing here, it's about the rating. As I mentioned in episode 1, anything less than 5 stars is the passenger recommending I be fired, and if I was fired, I would have been totally fucked because I bought this car, this expensive BMW, just for rideshare. However, sometimes I just couldn't hide it from people, and it wasn't because I was lying. It was because they could tell. I'm sure many of you have heard of gaydar. It's a very controversial topic. Some people say it's a real thing, and some people say it's bullshit. I personally think it's a real thing from my experience. It does seem to be real, and from some of the interactions I've had with, I guess, like, obviously gay customers, they could tell that there's something with me. Like, from the time they got in the car, before they even said anything to me, it's like they could just pick up on it. And that often led to unwanted flirtation. I don't like hitting on people, just in general. Like, I don't like going out to bars and, like, walking up to people and hitting on them. I especially don't like it in the workplace. Like, if I'm going to have this be a thing, like, I want to be able to pick the grounds that it comes on. Like, I want to be in the mood for it. I want to be seeking it out myself. I don't want someone to come to me. I especially don't want a person who's already paying me for money or I'm already doing a service for to start hitting on me. That's just not comfortable. It's not what I want. And when you're in a confined space like a car, there's kind of no escaping it either. That's the worst part about it. I have this running joke about when I was with an unpleasant passenger, particularly when it starts hitting on me, I just wanted to open up the door and tuck and roll, just like jump out of the moving car, just to get away from it. So to segue this into a few of these episodes where I was actually hit on, I've told you about the creep. It would start like this. They get in the car and they'd say, "My, aren't you adorable?" or something like that. "Are you single? Do you have a girlfriend?" Probing to get me to say, "No, I'm gay," or "No, I'm bisexual," or whatever I chose to say to a person. And as they're asking me these questions, they're leaning closer and closer, and they'll test the waters. They'll touch me once, playfully, and like a slap on the shoulder, like, "Haha, you're funny," or something like that. But it starts with one very innocent touch, and then one becomes two, and then it kind of slowly just starts to migrate to, "I'm going to just keep my hand on you. I have to, like, put my hand away." I never really got short with people. Only a handful of people escalated it to a level where I had to say something like, "Will you please stop? You're making me uncomfortable," or "Keep it up. I'm going to throw you out of the car." This one instance, I took these two guys home. They were both very drunk. It was late at night. And I drop off the guy paying for the ride first, and then he asked me to take his friend home, whose information I do not have. And this guy was being way overly aggressive, and it got to the point where I said, "If you touch me again, I'm going to leave you on the side of the highway." But that's not even the worst of it, listeners. I've made a lot of media appearances with my book, in terms of, like, local talk shows and the newspaper and, like, actually the evening news, all that stuff. One thing that always shocks journalists when I talk to them about my experiences is the amount of times that I have literally been solicited money for sex. I mean, if there's one thing that really people have learned from the Me Too movement, it's that people who are rich think that they can buy anything. This one guy, and I'm going to talk about this in a different story because it's more, the guy was an idiot, and the story's more about making fun of him. But at the end of the ride, he wanted me to go inside with him, and he first offers me $100, then he offers me $200, and he was pissed that money wasn't going to get me in his house. He really thought he could buy me. In another instance, one guy started out kind of innocent and then he escalated it fast. He's asked me how my night is going, and then we kind of start talking about Uber and how it works. And randomly he goes, "So are you partnered?" And I thought he meant, like, are you a partner with Uber? Or, like, I thought he was still carrying on the conversation about, like, how the whole system works, because Uber calls its drivers quote-unquote partners. So I start, I don't realize what he's getting into, and I just start kind of dumbly explaining, like, how the whole Uber thing works, and he goes, No. I mean, are you partnered? Is someone sucking your dick, or are you sucking someone else's? That's straight up what he said to me. And, like, I looked at him, and, like, I kind of realized what he said. I go, oh, no. And luckily, we were nearing his destination, so that was the end of it. And I think he felt bad for being so lewd, because he whipped out his wallet and he gave me a $20 bill and just, like, kind of embarrassingly got out. But that's the kind of caliber of stuff that you deal with, and I just hated dealing with it so much. It made me so uncomfortable. I tell, people ask me, "So what's it like being a driver? Do you think I should be a driver?" And I say, I mean, if I was a woman, I don't even know if I could do it. especially late at night, because some of the things that happened to me as a man were shocking. I couldn't imagine it as a woman. There's two more that I want to briefly mention. In the first episode and in the second episode, I talked about some of the gaps that exist with Uber and Lyft, some of the privacy gaps. And one of them, just to reiterate, a phone number that connects the driver and the passenger. It's a phone number that comes either through Uber or through Lyft. It's a generic phone number, and it's meant to protect privacy so that a passenger doesn't get a driver's real number or vice versa. But if the driver doesn't answer the phone call, it goes to their personal voicemail, and that doesn't get filtered. So for a while, I had a personal voicemail that had my whole name and my phone number, and that led to a few people getting my information and following me on Facebook and like trying to message me after the ride. This one guy, he started out cool. He got in the car and I complimented his watch. And me complimenting his watch somehow cued him that I was gay. So we spent the rest of the ride just aggressively flirting with me, and when we got there, it's just like, okay, get out. Well, the next day, he hits me up on Facebook. He's found me through the phone number because he called again after I drove off and I didn't answer. And he wanted to take me to the opera, and then he tries to proposition taking me to lunch, taking me on a trip, taking me to a hotel in town. This guy just was relentless. I didn't respond to him at all. I didn't even want to cue him that he had gotten the right person. But that was like shocking. And I don't know how long this hole remained a hole. I believe it is now plugged up. But still, I'm sure if it happened to me, I'm sure it happened to some other people, or some other people had some weird encounters through this. In fact, if you are a driver, I'd love to hear if you were affected by this somehow. Hopefully it wasn't bad. Actually, if you were affected by this, in all likelihood, it was probably bad. I mean, it's not like anyone's going to be like, so how'd you two meet? Well, I gave him an Uber ride a year ago, and well, he stalked me for about a year, and the first 9 months or so was rough. He ignored the restraining order, and I'd find him standing outside of my house at all hours of the day, rain or shine. But then, this one night when he broke into my house and I woke up and found him standing over me, holding a knife to my throat, well, shucks, just the way the moon caught his eye, I realized right then and there my refusals, that was the folly. And we fell in love. Said no one ever. Anyway, let's shift gears here a little bit. I have another story that is about a hole in the Uber and Lyft system. It's particularly in this one, it's Uber's hole. I guess Lyft probably has the same vulnerability. It's not a sexual harassment story, but it's scary. And considering it, it might actually be one of the, if not the most dangerous thing that happened to me throughout my entire rideshare career. This is trip 2406, and it's called Infiltration. The call's coming through from Mall of America, and for a while, before Mall of America had a designated area where Uber drivers and passengers were supposed to meet, it was chaos picking anybody up, because people would say, I'm at Mall of America. But guess what? Mall of America is like more than a mile around. So finding that person in the middle of a giant superstructure was about as difficult as it sounds. I'd have to drive around and around and around, and I would call people and ask them where they were. And because most people at Mall of America are from out of town, it was difficult to find them. The joke is, if you're from Minnesota, you avoid Mall of America like the plague. And I hate that place. It's an evil place. It's got a really, really messed up dark side to it. There's human trafficking issues. If you're a child, you are not allowed to go in there. If you're 15 or younger without a guardian, because kids get snatched up and they never get seen again. There's terrorism recruitment issues. Interestingly, fun fact about Mall of America, it is its own township with its own police department. I guess I don't know if it's technically its own township, but they call it its own township because it has its own police force. And I'm not talking rent-a-cops, like real cops, real badges, real guns. So needless to say, Mall of America has just this, I don't like it. I avoid it like the plague. And I also just don't like crowds and stuff like that. So add that into the mix, forget it. Anyway, so I'm back on track here. I'm trying to pick up this passenger who's at Mall of America. The guy's name is John. And I'm driving around and around. I'm trying to find him. I can't find him. And I grab the phone. I just pull over to park. And there's one spot where I can usually find passengers. They usually come to this one exit. So I go to this one exit, and I go to dial John. And it's a Thursday night. It's maybe 9 o'clock at night or so. So like right as the mall is going to be closing soon. Well, when I call the phone number, a very sleepy and grumpy male voice answers. It's like, hello? Like, hi, John. Yeah? John, this is Evan with Uber. I'm your driver, and I'm here at Mall of America at the whatever exit I was at. And the guy goes, Uber? I didn't order any Uber. What are you talking about? And I look up and I see there's this guy. He's in his like mid-40s, dressed semi-professionally, and he's like waving at me like I'm obviously his ride. And he comes walking up to the car, and I hang up on this guy on the phone, and this other guy gets in the car, and I go, "Hey, what's your name?" He goes, "John, Uber." And he shows me his phone, and he's got everything pulled up, my car, my info, the Uber app. Everything looks good. So I think to myself, well, this must just be a glitch with Uber, because there were so many glitches when I first started. This was within the first year of me driving. There were so many glitches back then that it would not surprise me if Uber just connected me to some random person, or somehow there was some kind of shortcoming with the app that I got paired, somehow connected with the wrong person. This guy, what he was showing me, everything looked legit. So I started driving, and this guy's going not very far away to a motel. And I asked him, so like, what are you doing here? And he mentions he's there for like a conference. He makes it sounded really boring. And there was nothing unusual about it, minus the fact the guy seemed a little on edge and a little hostile to me. So when we pulled over, I said, "Thank you for the ride." And I went to shake his hand, and he shook it, but he looked at me just so weird. And I couldn't quite make any sense of it. He gets out of the car, and he looks back at me again, like kind of weird as he's going in. So I'm driving off, thinking, that was bizarre. I don't know what was going on there. And the next day, when I look at my payout stub, I see that Uber is not paying me for this ride. And I get back to Uber, and I write an angry email, like, "Why are you withholding money from me? I think they're stealing from me again." Uber writes back to me that John the person who was named John, flagged the trip as being fraudulent and said that he never took the trip. And I said, "Well, I drove the person who showed me the phone that appeared to be John. Everything seemed in order. I did the trip. You should be paying me for this. I did all that was asked of me. The fact that there was some kind of a shortcoming on your end, that's not my problem. I still need to be paid for the work that I did." And so Uber sends me this thing back trying to dismiss paying me. They won't pay me. It was only like $5 or something like that. So I sent them back something saying, "Listen to me. What you're telling me is that your system isn't safe, because what you're telling me is I drove a stranger. That person showed me that everything was good on their phone." So in other words, they were hacking into the phone, or they were doing something to fraudulently obtain this other person's account and use me to get around. So what you're telling me is the system is flawed, and that some stranger can get into my car using someone else's account and do who knows what. This guy could have had a gun. He could have been robbing me. He could have assaulted me and jumped out, and I would have had no idea who he was. The only thing that kept me safe as a driver was the fact that I had a person's credit card information on file. Like I mentioned with the fighter, that was the only thing that got him out, was reminding him that I had his bank account by a string. So I'm saying, Uber, what you're telling me is I could be murdered. I could pick up somebody who could do something awful to me, and you're not liable, and you don't care about it. Well, they quickly paid me after that, but it was a glaring flaw that I exposed, and it's really scary to think about. I mean, the way this guy was acting, he was, you might be saying, okay, maybe it was just some kind of a glitch. No, the way this guy was acting, he was definitely breaking into somebody else's account. I don't know how he did it, if he was a hacker, what the deal was, but he was using John's account fraudulently. I'm only glad that he was only just trying to score a free ride. Now, if you think about it, that guy's committing a felony by using someone's credit card information to score a free ride like that. So if he's got the balls to commit a felony so that he doesn't have to walk like 3 miles or 2 miles, he was within walking distance of where we were at Mall of America. If he's got the balls to do that, he's either very dangerous or very stupid. In any event, it was a huge risk that could have unfolded in a very, very bad way for me. Listeners, I have one final chilling story to share with you. Now, I was going to share this story in an upcoming episode because one of these ones that I'm going to do is only going to be the rides that brought about just great intrigue and interest, like interesting things I heard. This hinged on it, but it was so goddamn scary what this guy told me that I had to include it here because it just chilled me, and it still chills me thinking about it. In fact, one reviewer of UBERED said this story alone was worth the whole cost of the book. This is trip 1889, and it's called Mayo Doctors. So as many of you may know, Minnesota is home to the Mayo Clinic, and the Mayo Clinic is basically, if you don't know, it's the best hospital on earth, or at least it's one of them. There are people that come from all over the world to be seen here. I'm talking about celebrities, billionaires, royalty. So this particular night, it is July, and it's like a hot summer night. There's a concert going on, at the Xcel Energy Center in St. Paul. And I have a man named Klein hailing me at the Xcel right before a concert starts. So I pull up, and he is visibly intoxicated with these three women. And they pile into the car. He sits in front. They sit in back. And they're really drunk. And they're going to this concert, but they forgot their tickets back at their hotel in Minneapolis. So we have to drive to Minneapolis, pick up the tickets at the hotel, and then drive back. Basically, I'm going in a big circle. Well, we start talking on the highway, and I ask Klein what he does. And he tells me he is a heart surgeon at the Mayo Clinic, and the three in back, he says they're his naughty nurses. But they're his nurses, or like he works with them, and they're up for the night just for this concert. They got a hotel. They're doing it big. So we're chatting, and I realize as soon as he says that he's a Mayo Clinic doctor, I've just stumbled onto a wonderful opportunity to explore something I've wondered a lot about because, well, he's drunk, his guard is down, and the Mayo Clinic is a place of great intrigue. I've only been there once. I took my mom there a couple years ago to get some tests done. She's fine. But it's like its own city. Well, it's in Rochester, so it is its own city. But the facility itself is so big, and there's so many eclectic people around there. There's, like I said, there's royalty. There's all kinds of rich people. There's all kinds of doctors, all kinds of people that are coming in for... It's like the who's who of medicine. It's Hollywood for medicine, if you will. So I say, okay, well, you operate on royalty. He says, yeah. I go, what about Middle Eastern royalty? And I look over, and he shifts kind of uncomfortably. And he says, yeah, I operate on them all the time. They're very bizarre. And I'm like, okay, well, how's that? Like security detail breathing down your neck? And he says that and the culture. I'm the surgeon, right? That means I'm the one who operates. But the women can't be touched by anyone other than their husbands. So when I give pre-op exams, I have a female nurse do it while I give instructions. I keep both hands behind my back when they go under, and as soon as they're knocked out, I perform the operation myself. When they wake up, there's this weird game we play where I pretend that the nurse did the operation. Of course, they know it's bullshit, but I still have to pretend like I never laid a finger on them. And I said, well, okay, well, what about the men? He's like, what do you mean? And I go, well, they're kings, princes, multi-billionaires. How do they behave? And he says, I try not to judge. And then he's like hesitating for a minute, and he says, I don't know. Some of them give me the willies, and I don't like it. They're powerful, and they love to flaunt it. And I look at him, and I go, okay, well, how? And he thinks a moment, and he says, have you ever seen $1 million in cash before? And I look at him again, no. And he goes, well, I see it every week. Sometimes even more. It's how they pay for surgery. And I'm like, wait, they pay for healthcare in cash? And then he reminds me, it's not like they need health insurance. They've got more money than they know what to do with. In their eyes, it's just an unlimited supply of paper. And so I ask him, do you ever get to converse? Like small talk not related to medicine? And he says, not usually. Why? And then I say, well, sometimes when I drive, I like to latently mess with passengers I don't like. It's a lot of fun, especially when I say things that go right over their head. If somebody's being a dick, maybe casually mention that you just got a speeding ticket in your new Tesla or something. It's a clever way to remind them that their oil money won't last forever. And Klein says, I wish I could do something like that. Believe me when I say these are not the people you mess with. And he's being very weird about it after that, and he won't really divulge anymore. And I'm looking at him like, no. You're gonna tease me with something like this? You're gonna tell me the rest of it. So he goes on to tell me, he says, royal planes don't get searched. It's not worth risking an international scandal for either party, Saudi Arabia or America. And some of these guys have ties to the globe's underworld, weapons, terrorism, even the slave trade. And do you know who fetches top dollar as a sex slave? Americans. So when he said this, I immediately thought back to something, and it just made the hairs on my arm stand up. Not only because this itself is unnerving, but my mom, I mentioned in episode 1, she was a makeup artist. She had a client in the 1980s who bought makeup from her and then went missing the next day. And the only trace, they never found this woman. The only trace they ever found of her was my mom's makeup that she sold her scattered all over the runway of the Rochester airport. True story. All right, listeners, that's going to be it for this edition of the UBERED podcast. Hopefully I won't give you nightmares with some of the stuff I just told you about. A reminder that I am posting new episodes every Wednesday. Be sure to subscribe, tweet about it, tell your friends to tell their friends. I'm also on @UberedBooks, where I share quotes, stories, and all kinds of other tidbits about my former life as a rideshare driver. I am retired. I'm also the author of UBERED, My Life as a Rideshare Driver, the sequel UBERED 2, and my debut novel, Wolf in the Jungle, all available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. And let me just say, if you hate Nazis half as much as I do, Wolf in the Jungle is the book for you. Thanks for tuning in, listeners. You have been Ubered. I'm Evan Kale.